Hey guys, this is George from Firehouse Music, and I'm here once again with Lon Koslak, and this is his shop in his garage, and he's got a lot of really cool tools that he's gonna tell us about, and a bunch of wood right there, you guys can see. And those are gonna be the raw materials for the neck that we're gonna be building. Super excited about this project. I think you are too.
Absolutely, yeah. Can't wait to get started.
Awesome.
So I guess we'll start off by taking a look at some of the tools we're going to use.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, so for this project, we're going to use a lot of different tools to craft this custom neck for George. We're going to use a lot of hand tools. We're also going to use a lot of power tools. One of the first steps here is we're actually have to choose and actually process some raw lumber. So to process the lumber, what we're going to use is this right here, which is a Dewalt thickness planer. So this is going to allow us to make sure that the flat sides of the board are going to be nice and smooth and ready to do some of our work. Moving on from there, afterwards we're going to use the joiner to make sure that the sides are flat, and we'll also use the table saw over here to make sure that the sides are ripped and perfectly 90 degrees so that we can make all the accurate measurements that we need to. Getting a board nice and true is going to be very important for this project so that we can make sure that all of the very highly precise measurements that we need to make this neck are in line. Along the path, we're also going to have to use this bandsaw to cut out a rough outline of the neck, and we'll finish it up here with the router table for the last step here in carving the neck outline itself. Okay, so here we are at the bench, and I've got George's guitar here that we'll be replacing the neck on. And as we said in the last video, the Telecaster necks and Stratocaster necks are slightly different. Now, if we go in here to the guitar, it looks like a rounded profile, and there may be some space in the neck pocket. We really want to get that as close to a flush fit as we possibly can for the best transference of vibration of the strings. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take the strings off, and we're going to remove the neck and investigate a little bit further just to confirm that we're building this the right way. Now we've got the neck off of the guitar, and we can look at a couple different things. So first of all, it's pretty easy to tell this is a Stratocaster style neck. It's got the traditional Stratocaster headstock here, the rounded heel. It's a 4-bolt neck, and this is a third party. I'm not going to mention the name of it, but you can probably read it. This company's great here, but we can confirm a couple things before we start the build, because the last thing we want to do is go through all this effort and end up building something that's not going to fit the right way. Sure. So first thing here is just to confirm here, this is what you call a Stratocaster neck template, which is used to cut out pieces of wood here to mimic the exact shape. This does fit very nicely right over the instrument, as you would expect. It's basically exactly what you would want. Now, in the planning of this, we want to make a couple adjustments. Now, cosmetically, correct me if I'm wrong, George, but I think you want to go with the larger headstock, right?
Yes.
So, in the late 60s and 70s, Fender actually went with a much larger headstock here to make kind of a more dynamic presence. And we're going to substitute that on there, which shouldn't make much of a difference in the measurements. One thing that is probably the most important to recognize about any type of neck is what's called the scale length. The scale length is actually the distance from the nut all the way to the bridge on the guitar. There's a few industry standards, and Fender likes to use 25.5 inches for their scale. So on most models, that's going to be the same scale, and there's going to be really just kind of cut and paste efforts here on the cosmetic portion. Where it gets a little tricky is that Telecasters and Stratocasters have a slightly different heel pocket, which is what we had talked about previously. So if you notice on this template here, we've got a nice curved edge, and it's much easier to see on a template than on the actual guitar. So there's a nice curved edge there, whereas on a Telecaster template, you're going to have a much more straight edge with much less rounded corners. So just to put them kind of side by side here, you can see that there's quite a big difference in the way that that's going to fit, which is very important when we're talking about how the neck fits into the neck pocket. So essentially what we're going to do, since these do have the same scale length, you can see that pretty easily by where the fret markers are. They do just line up. We're going to create a new template and simply transpose the heel of the Telecaster onto the neck of the late 60s, early 70s style Stratocaster headstock. However, before we do that, we still want to double check again. We always hear cut twice check twice and then cut once, right? As you can probably tell, it doesn't always go that way. But we're gonna do our best here and check for a third time. So I'm gonna take this body that we have, and true to form, like any Stratocaster or any Telecaster, it does look to have a more square fit, and we are going to slide this piece in here, and man, that looks about perfect.
Yeah, show the camera. So
we're going to do our best here to do that, but you can see that that is just a much better fit than what we had before, which is essentially this model. You can see there's just a lot of space in the corners here where that neck meets the body, and we really don't want that. We want to get a lot more sound transference by putting in these square edges. So the next step is, let's make a new template. So here we are at the table. Our goal on this step is to combine these two MDF templates into a new template that uses this headstock with this heel. So we've got a couple commonalities. They are the same scale length, so that's pretty easy. They're basically the same width, and the center line lines up pretty nicely. So this will be a pretty easy little job for us. What we're going to do here is we're going to start off with a straight line just across the board. We want to make sure that the widest part of the neck does fit on the MDF template. So I'm going to start off here just by marking the center line, or at least a rough approximation. It doesn't have to be perfectly square to this board or anything else. All we're doing is looking for a straight line to draw a to base all the other drawings off of. So from here we have a straight line. Now, first thing I'm going to do is line up that straight line with the center line of my Telecaster template here. Take your time on this step, make sure it's nice and neat. Okay, and once you got that center line exactly where you want it, little tip here is you can also look through the dot marker holes on these templates to make sure that line is exactly where you need it to be. And then we're going to use that just to get the drawing started and get that heel drawn out. Keep your pencil sharp here and sharpen frequently if you need to. Alright, and that's all we need from that spot. Whoa, just kidding. There is one more thing that we need to do here. We've got a reference line that we will take care of to make sure that we get the exact same length, the same scale length on both templates. And that is to mark the fretboard starting point. That is where the nut gets inserted into the fingerboard, and that'll help us make sure that we're on the same path when we switch this template over. So now I've got the new template we're working on. We're going to line up that cross section. It's where the nut's going to go, and we're going to make sure that the center line's lined up with the same center line as before. And again, take your time on this step, make sure you get it right. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be as close to perfect as you can get it. All right, and then from here, what we can do is quite simply continue that tracing pattern that we started with the Telecaster all the way around here. And with that, we have our new template. Okay, so here we are with our template cut out. Now, in case you're wondering how we got there, basically what we did is just took that board over to the bandsaw, did a rough cut on that, and then we took these templates, the original templates that we used, and just used double-sided tape to stick them together and then use a router table to make sure you get, with a flush trim bit, to make sure you get a nice clean edge across this side. Now, once I got close to the heel, I switched the templates out to make sure that the heel pocket's gonna match up nice and neat. So now we've got what looks to be a working template, but I'm gonna check with the body again just to make sure that we're still on the right track. All right, so we're gonna take that template that we have, make sure it fits in here nice and neat, and it is a tight fit, which is exactly what we want. And man, that looks pretty great. What do you think, George?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right. So from there, now we can start having the real fun.
Yes.
Okay, so back at the workbench again. The next step is actually a really fun part in my opinion. Time to select the woods we're going to use, right? So you kind of come with me before saying that you had an idea to do similar kind of styles before, just rosewood on maple, which is a very common combination of woods to use. Now there's a few different things that we can talk about when we're looking at selecting woods. And if you ask a million different luthiers the best way to select woods, you're going to get a million different answers. So these are just, from my experience, take what you want from it. So let's start off. Does maple and rosewood still look like a good option? We have a few different ones we can look at as well. So just to kind of give you a frame of reference here, that just the differences in what you can get. This is actually a board of paw ferro. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that word or not. I've never been quite sure on that. But it's a beautiful wood. It's used on a lot of Fender Stratocasters from kind of different time periods. And we have a couple different flavors of rosewood here as well. So these are a little darker. And if you want something with a little more figuring, this is also rosewood. So this will be for the fretboard itself.
So I know that for the fretboard generally you want a denser wood, which is why things like ebony and rosewood get picked. Mm-hmm. What are other like parameters? Like how do you choose? How do you know a piece of wood is going to make a good fretboard?
Yeah, great question. So the woods that are going to be a little harder, are a little denser, are going to be the best options for your actual transference of vibrations. That's actually kind of a very interesting topic among luthiers as to whether or not there is such thing as a tone wood. Some people think that that electric guitars have, it's pretty much all the pickup sound and no wood change in the wood doesn't change the sound, right? Other people think that that's paramount to the importance of it. I'm personally a fan of the strategy of you are what you eat, that philosophy. So I think that we choose the best ingredients that we possibly can to make this new instrument. The biggest things to really think about here, and again, all of this is negotiable. It's all up to personal taste. But when you're looking for dense woods, if you can find some that are a little less figured, that have less knots in them, they're going to have a little bit more clear transparency or vibrational transference, right? I'm not sure if that's a real term, but we're going to roll with it.
Sure.
Other than that, it's kind of up to aesthetics, and there are a few parameters that people choose as far as the woods that they want to use. You want to use something that's going to be structurally very strong, something that's going to hold the tuning, but also not too strong. You don't want a neck that's completely unresponsive because it's too stiff, and you also don't want to make a wood out of, or a neck out of balsa wood. That's just going to break in half. So maple's a very common choice for the actual neck itself. I would say any of these options for your fretboard are going to be great options.
Just pick the prettier one. Right?
Yeah, pick the prettier one. Yeah, exactly. Now, as far as like actually, I said, you know, avoiding the knots earlier. You can always fill some of those in, and some people actually like to build a piece as more of an aesthetic piece around the knots because it can create an interesting aesthetic. There's really no wrong answers here. Just be aware, especially on a fretboard, if you're using a piece that's got a lot of knots, this one has a couple, that it may be harder to cut through. It may be harder to do some of the delicate work because that change in grain is going to be really interesting to work with. So it all comes down to your comfort level and your aesthetic preference.
And then there was something else. So I know different types of wood. I don't know if you guys can hear, but right, if you compare that to some of these longer pieces, anchor this. There's a difference in pitch. The pitch that they resonate. Every material has its own like vibration rate, so it's gonna. There's a difference in pitch. Does that how does that impact? Because I've heard some guitarists talk about it, and others like don't care about it.
Yeah.
And they're thinking like, no, like the material of the neck has less to do with the tone of your guitar. It's just more about structure. And other guys are like, no, like it absolutely impacts because the resonance like adds to that richness to the tone. And I tend to kind of subscribe to a lot of that voodoo and like, yeah, like.
And what you're saying is right. It is just kind of like a voodoo scenario.
Yeah.
Now, I personally, I subscribe to the same thing. I find it hard to believe that there's people out there that can't, or that there's some, that it's impossible for somebody to hear the difference. I think that there's somebody out there with the ears that are tuned so well that they can absolutely hear the difference in the pitches of wood when you're testing it like that, and that's going to make a big difference long term for how they work with that instrument. For the vast majority of people, they're probably not going to hear a huge amount. Now, when you knock on that piece of wood, use a single knuckle to try and get that tone, and listen to how long it rings out. In my mind, that seems to correlate directly with how long, how beautiful the sustain can be on the finished piece. I don't know if that can be really objectively measured. Somebody out there probably can. But to me, I like to look for the pitches more like a bell, something that's going to ring for a little while, have a nice clear tone, and not just a dull thud. One last thing we're going to consider here when selecting this, and that is, does the template fit the wood? Can't tell you how many times I have gone to look at the lumber store or lumber yard to try and pick out a piece and find a beautiful piece of wood, and then I get over here and I'm like, you know what? This thing might fit, but it's going to be pretty dang close or really hard to deal with. So make sure that it fits the template you're going to use. So that's going to limit our selection just a little bit. So what we got here is a couple of different pieces of maple, and see, this could be an interesting piece. It has some beautiful figuring in here, and a lot of this, you can see how it's got a little reflective quality to it. It's got a couple of knots that we want to avoid, so we'll have to lop off the end of there if we wanted to use that. When I'm looking at these long boards, though, what I want to look for is it relatively straight? This one looks pretty good. There's a bit of a curve at the end that we might have to adjust if we wanted to use this piece. And let's see here. How does it sound?
That's pretty rich.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No major knots in here that we need to be worried about. Any knots that I'm seeing are just very small. So that's looking pretty good. That's a pretty good contender. And let's look at this piece. This piece of maple, beautiful. Flip it over here. You look at this. This is a little piece of, looks like the heartwood, part of the cut. We got a kind of gnarly knot right down there, but some pretty nice figuring across the board. Uh-oh. One problem. There's no way we're going to make that thing fit on there. So this one's straight out. And let's look at this. These are all just scraps I had in the shop, by the way. So we didn't go shopping for this specific one. We're going to see what we can find here. Now this piece of maple looks promising. It's got some nice figuring here, but there's one big problem with this one. George, can you see it?
Oh, there's like a crack down the middle.
There's a crack down the middle, right. And funny story about this one. When I bought it, couldn't see a crack whatsoever. So sometimes it's the luck of the draw. Maybe it split along the way, but as soon as I started working on this piece of wood, it became evident that that crack not only went down to right here where it's visible, but it runs the entire length of the board. So we're not going to use this one for it. Single option here for today's project, unless we want to go buy more wood. We take this and turn it into a guitar neck. Next step is going to be to process this guy and get it ready for the actual part.